South Asia Committee of the International Law Section presents the Global Lawyers Summit in association with CNBC TV 18.
Firstly, thank you so much. I have an amazing, I would say, a stellar cast, I would say, for this panel discussion. Each one of them bringing in their experience, their perspective, and their knowledge which they have seen over the period across jurisdictions and across various sectors and practices. Our discussion today is anti-bribery, anti-corruption, which is, I think these are terms like fraud, mismanagement, corruption, which might be music to an ears of an external counsel, but definitely not for the general counsels in any corporate. Nobody wants to hear this, that they are faced with a whistleblower complaint, or there is some mismanagement happening in the organization where an investigation is required. So, but unfortunately, it's not just because the mismanagement or the fraud is happening internally within your organization. You are faced with situations when you have maybe a US corporate, a US parent, a UK parent, or somebody, an organization in Singapore or Hong Kong, and their subsidiaries are in India. So you're not just facing the Indian regulators, but you're also facing the regulators in US as well, or the respective jurisdiction. What do I do? I think the general counsel's first call would be, do I need to involve an external counsel day one itself? Or let's try and see internally what we can do about it. And I mean, let's face it, no in-house counsel wants to involve an external counsel. It's a legal cost. Nobody wants to go through that process. But I think investigation is a situation which is at the 11th hour when you're faced with it. It's a problematic situation. You need to smolder the fire. You don't really have an option but to think what is going to be the next step, and if I don't do something about it to address it, what could be the implications? I think in that background where we are seeing regulators world over actually tightening the noose when it comes to the mismanagement or corruption or bribery that's happening across, it becomes even more important for the in-house counsels as well as external counsels to be on the same page when you start an investigation. I think on that note, I'm going to start today's session and would request actually each one of my panelists to give their views and experiences as to what kind of trends they have seen of late with respect to receiving complaints, whether it's through the normal route internally within the organization or it is through a whistleblower complaint, and what are the kind of areas where they have actually seen such kind of investigations happening. And I'm going to open the floor with starting with Anushri to tell her about her experiences.
Thanks, Payal, for putting me under the fire first go. Hi, it's so nice to meet everyone. What we have seen is, especially in India, a growing focus on ESG. That's environment, social governance strategies, and the need for ESG strategies for companies in India. That's not going away anytime soon. Part of ESG governance is also best practices, and it's becoming increasingly important given that we have investors coming in from multiple jurisdictions. There are tremendous value additions to a company which has good governance measures and which are clean and ESG compliant. And so, putting those checks, balances, processes in place become crucial. And therefore, it also gives impetus to people within the organization to highlight issues that they feel compromise the governance aspects of the company. It's not necessarily just corruption. It could be anything from, discrimination against employees, discrimination based on gender, and two aspects that we've seen over the years. One is where companies have an open, inclusive policy or an open, inclusive culture. These complaints usually go up through the management level, through appropriate channels, whether it's to HR or the general counsel or whoever. where people have some sense of comfort within the organization that it will be handled sensitively and it will be handled independently. Where whistleblower complaints come up, largely what we've seen are anonymous complaints. Could be for two reasons. One is despite policies being in place saying that whistleblowers are to be protected against any repercussions, there's still not that comfort that the employees feel. Um, Also, a lot of the times, and we've seen some, I was reading a very interesting survey that was conducted by one of the leading law firms as of 2023, that there's a large component of employees within organizations, especially large organizations, that may not be aware of a whistleblower complaint, they may not be aware of who to approach, and what is the course of action to take. So you might have anonymous complaints going not through the hotlines that companies have set up and mentioned, but to directors, to the CFO, the CEO, to investors sometimes, which creates a much bigger issue for companies um, rather than us, rather than just going through the hotline. So those are the kind of trends that we're seeing. But across the board, I think we found general counsels and companies being far more cognizant of the risks and willing to investigate and look at it from a, obviously not all complaints will be substantive or even have merit, but the need to investigate and to find how much of it holds water, how much of it is vexatious, is something that most general counsels are being very, very alive to now.
Shujat, is the experience different for you?
I think I would largely, second the thoughts by the panelists, but just to give a perspective on the trends, what I've generally seen, definitely one in terms of the, the tone at the top, or the culture and all. I think the conversation level have significantly gone up. Right, that is one bigger trend what we see in several years, and of course, the ESG aspect is also pushing the whole stuff. I mean, if you see the vendor diligence processes, or even from a transaction diligence aspect, I think this has become one of the significant element for a major decision making. That also has put a focus, and consequently the ethics and compliance programs have to be strengthened, and ABAC policies and all these things is coming into the significant light, and that brings the whole awareness and the training and sensitization. I mean, and most of the companies have to demonstrate the awareness and all of these things leads to the the increase of the numbers. I mean, one of the big parameters of how the program is running, we can always say, oh, we don't have any complaints. Right. And the moment you say there is no whistleblower complaints, there again a big question mark. Right. So that's a dichotomy which we always deal with into, right? When we see some of these things increase, the numbers definitely enhance as well. And most of the programs have enhanced the channels. I mean, earlier it was only one number, but now it's through emails, web-based forms, and third-party service providers. I was also reading in a similar survey that I think web-based the forms are number one in terms of the reporting, and confidence in terms of the the program, the retaliation, non-retaliation, and all those stuff has increased a little bit more confidence in terms of the the complainants. And the nature of complaints, I think still largely the violation of the company policies, followed by anti-bribery, corruption, procurement-related frauds. I think those are all the usual suspects which are continue to be there. Apart from that, I think some of the human angles as well. The HR-related aspects, the discrimination, DEI. I think those also continue to raise. And with respect to the new millennials and all, I mean, in terms of assertiveness also, I think there's a lot of focus around those aspects. So all of these are definitely increasing in terms of the trends, what I would say. Similarly, one of the trend and biggest challenge in terms of this whole investigations is with respect to the collecting the evidence aspect of it. I mean, increasingly it's becoming a challenge in terms of finding direct evidence as things are happening in a very innovative manner, including Benami and all those aspects. I think that's one of the bigger challenge is to how do we investigate and at the same time how do we collect the evidences and do all of those aspects. And of course there comes the role in terms of working with the right people. These are all various trends I am seeing in terms of this particular space, and I definitely feel I think this will only grow more. In terms of all these programs and contractually as well. Again, whether it is from a funding standpoint or from an investment standpoint, you're all having all these contractual obligations, and as part of the sustainability or ESG reporting, as you can see from BRSR, even this data also have to be mentioned, number of complaints, how they have been resolved, and what are the awareness programs have been done, all those aspects. So I think all these aspects combined with the facts which my colleague mentioned, I see it takes an upbeat in terms of the program.
So definitely an upward trend.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess as external counsels, that's good news for us. But I think having heard a perspective from general counsels in a fund and in another corporate, the kind of trend which you are seeing is maybe similar to, but could be in-house complaints related to interpersonal issues, HR issues, obviously, and bribery and corruption. And I'm going to shift the gears and move to Mr. Jalundwala, who has been with a group for almost 2 decades now, and one of the largest groups of the country, and the scale at which it has grown over the last 10 years especially, handling so many portfolios, so many subsidiaries. I think the job is extremely difficult one. How are you managing it? What are you doing to ensure that you don't face such complaints?
Good afternoon to all. I think the subject which has been selected by the organizer is very important in today's world. Anti-corruption and anti-bribery, which we say ABC laws. So this has become a talk of town today, everywhere. If you start with any investigation, which may start like SEBI investigation, SFIO, ED investigation, CBI investigations, and so many other agencies. Now NAFRA also is one of the biggest investigative agency. How at Adani we just deal with these things? One, I will tell about this formation of the policies, which is very important. Say we have a whistleblower policy from 2014 onwards. We have anti-corruption, anti-bribery policy later. But what happens? Okay, suppose we have a policy. It is only on paper, then it will not serve the purpose. What my predecessor said rightly, that awareness is very important. See, if you have a policy and the employees, they are in huge numbers, like 50,000 plus. If they are not aware where to approach, what to do, how to do, then the real transparency will not come into picture. The real happenings will not come into picture. So we always have the awareness programs from time to time that there is a whistleblower policy. This is anti-corruption bribery policy. We also put at our cafe, which is around 1,000 people sit together and eat. There we are putting the placards, playboards, saying that whistleblower policy, how to approach. So this policy has been, we can say, circulated and advertised to bring to a particular thing on earth, like anti-bribery, corruption, or these things. This is the way, first, I can say what awareness we are doing. Secondly, how this whistleblower, how these complaints have been conducted, how they have been solved, how they have been resolved. Say, in today's world, instead of now physical complaints, it has moved to digital complaint. The employees are authorized or are empowered to send these complaints anonymously without naming them. And those complaints in our organization, we have put an email ID that is chairman's office only. So sometimes what happened, let me tell very clearly, some complaints come to me as a general counsel. I feel that forget these complaints, nothing more. Who I am to take this decision? So that goes to the chairman office only, first of all. which type of complaints are there. Even from any listed company or at a Adani Group, it goes to them. Now, what happens once the complaints are received? Second point is investigation. How to investigate? Sometimes what happens, some person fearlessly says, who is the complainant? If I know Mr. XYZ is a complainant, then we'll call him, talk with him, get the explanation from him, how do you derive this complaint also. If it is not a named complaint, it is unnamed, then internally we will check whether this is a correct thing or not. We'll try to get the market feedback. Say reason behind, suppose sometimes what happens, some complaint is that he is taking kickback from the vendor. Then in that case, we have to go in the market and try to find out intelligence from the market. After getting this, internal report will be prepared and will be seen and will be placed to the particular committee that this is what we have received and Mr. XYZ is indulging in such practice. Then we will call that person, we'll discuss with him, we will give him that this is the event which we have noticed against you. And having counseling with him for 2-3 times, we found till date that the person is either confessing or saying no, very less. 95% we got the positive result. Now, after getting the investigation, next step, what to do? Now, the third step is what? Sometimes there are serious complaints or some serious complaint is there. Then we have no choice but to ask the person to leave organization. And sometimes whatever he has received as a kickback, we will try to get it recovered from him. Suppose we find that there is a complaint which is not that much serious, then we try to punish him by way of a placement at some other place. Suppose some person is working at X place, so he may be shifted to Y place quite far from the place where he is. Then what happens thereafter also? After scrutinizing all the complaints, whatever we receive, we will see which type of complaints are coming more. So like vendors kickback, sometimes it comes like traveling. If I'm traveling, I'm putting my expenses higher than what it has to be. Then we'll see in such area, what type of control, more control we have to put into. That we will see. Sometimes vendor, when a new vendor is being appointed, then we get a declaration, confirmation on affidavit and saying that he will not indulge himself any such practices. And whoever vendor has already done this practice and we found, then we'll try to say him bye-bye. He will not engage you in future. Then further awareness programs on a particular type of complaint. That also we need to do so that it can be curbed over a period of time. These are the practices which we adopt. Apart from this, whatever IT said, ESG is a very important point as of now, and that is environment, social, and governance. The governance is very important, and this governance covers all the things. I will let you know later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, Jenny, all of them, I think, have told us the trends and actually laid down the plan of action also in a way what they want to do right from the beginning, even before they receive a complaint and post the investigation as well. But being an external counsel, I think there are two aspects that come into place. What is the strategy you're putting into place when you have been shared the complaint? That this is how would you run that investigation itself? And given, I think the reason why we want an external counsel in the first place is to ensure that the sanctity of the investigation is protected as well as the privilege is maintained. So from that perspective, when you receive a complaint from a client, how do you go about with the investigation plan?
Excuse me. Thank you, Payal, and thank you for inviting me to return to India. My connection with Payal is we were actually involved in a cross-border investigation not so long ago. So the question's a very good one. So I think overall, in terms of kind of background, I spent a lot of time in my career with US firms and UK firms. And I think this is where Indian companies will most likely face a situation where you may need to involve external counsel, where you will have, if the company has a US or a UK touch point. I think these two governments have been most proactively looking into investigating issues of bribery and corruption. So if a company faces a whistleblower complaint, and as my co-panelists have mentioned, this is often very easy to raise, especially with online complaints. If you have a US or a UK touch point, the company needs to take it incredibly seriously. Because you don't want to be faced with a massive prosecution and fine from overseas governments who will have long-arm reach. So the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you have you're aware of which international touch points you might have and what implications that might have. You also need to make sure, because a lot of these jurisdictions from around the world, not only do they have legislation tackling prevention of bribery and corruption, but there's also whistleblower protection programs that are very strong and that could lead to substantial fines. So you need to make sure that you have mechanisms in place to prevent retaliation, to prevent anonymity of witnesses, and so forth. When it comes to formulating the plan, you need to make sure that you quickly establish, a control group, for example, so that the information doesn't leak. Because sometimes the allegation may relate to a member of senior management, for example. So you have to make sure you tighten the control of information immediately. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, but once you work out, who needs to know about the information, then you start mapping out, issues of how to maintain privilege in the investigation. And then it comes to points where sometimes a situation could be, one of the matters I worked with is, senior management was involved in bribes, and because news travels so fast, before senior management finds out that we've flown in international counsel, local counsel, everybody's on board, we basically had a weekend to investigate as much as we could, find the relevant witnesses who may have information, find the documents before the individual who was alleged to have been involved in any sort of wrongdoing finds out from other people who report directly to this person. So there are many considerations that have to be mechanisms that have to be put into place that require us to move very quickly. And I guess the other issue, you have to keep in mind is, where do you have, if you have witness interviews, where do you interview witnesses? Culturally, you also have to make sure, if it's employees at, retail stores, maybe in outside the city, do you bring them into a law firm? That will cause them to feel very uncomfortable. You don't want to cause them to climb up and not give you the information that you need. If your company is an open plan office, which is becoming more and more common these days, do you have your witness interviews in the office where everybody's going to talk about it before you even finish the first interview? So these are all considerations that you need to map out very quickly when in developing your investigation plan.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I think we have kick-started this session with talking about trends and actually taking everyone through the entire phase or the process of doing an investigation itself. And I think, as Jenny rightly said, there is no one size fits all. The point is, it has to be flexible. It needs to be, you may start off with a notion that, okay, this is the limited aspect I am looking at. But while you keep looking at that issue, you don't know what else comes out of that entire I would say, the investigation which you are doing on a particular point at that stage. Which takes me to an important question where we obviously heard the in-house counsels talking about having policies in place, having proper mechanisms in place so that people can raise those issues itself, and then investigating them and maybe having a committee to also address what to do about it. But which takes us to the tricky subject of privilege itself, which is a very important issue when it comes to investigations. I think till date we are looking at the Indian Evidence Act when you need to understand how privilege works in India. Obviously, when it comes to precedents, we go back to English judgments because there are not too many when it comes to under the Indian law. Again, in-house counsels are not granted that kind of privilege when it comes under Indian law. So, go to a general counsel? Do I go to an external counsel, or do I get it done internally by my set of lawyers itself? I think that's the first question which the in-house counsels face itself when you have to initiate an investigation. So I think I want to understand today from all the counsels over here, what is your personal view? How would you look at this law? Would you want it to be amended? Would you want not all issues to be raised before an external counsel? Or are you okay dealing with it internally itself? Shujat, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah. No, I think this has been a long, debated point, right? I mean, even I think within the, general counsel sector also you'll have two views. I mean, there one sector they will definitely feel, there has to be a privilege. And another side of the argument would be now we are talking about general counsels as a business advisors, business partners, being part of the executive committees. So then where is the question of? And even if you see the Bombay High Court judgment and all, they talked about, privilege available only in, independent capacity. So that will continue to have a, debate. But from an organization standpoint, if you see, I think some of the organizations are very clear saying that, okay, whatever might be the investigation, from the beginning we want to have a external counsel so that we have that privilege, maintained. So that is some approach we see. And I think, similarly other organizations may have a different approach in terms of a matter, right? Let's say there's a lot of internal investigations are there. Of course, internal versus external reportings and all. For some of those internal related matters, I think, the general counsel or the compliance officer can do the investigation. Depending on the matter, when we feel that this will be potential litigation or potential external investigation, I think that's the time when, we bring in external counsels into play as well. So I think that's my, thought on, this particular topic, and, it's a debatable topic on this. Yeah.
So we are not advocating for one way or the other yet. Anushri, a slightly different view, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where we stand today in terms of the Evidence Act, as you mentioned, Companies Act, obviously the conservative bet would be to immediately have external counsel get in privilege. Looking at what is an advocate. The Evidence Act clearly defines it as in very, very clear terms, advocate, vakil. Of course, 129 talks about legal advisor, but that's debatable. So the conservative approach to take is to have external counsel. But personally, I think this issue of privilege is something that I feel it should extend to in-house counsel. I think the debates on whether you have to be whether just because you're an employee of a company you are not, that's something I feel that needs to be revisited, because at the end of the day, if you see all corporate counsel and the trends that we're seeing, again I go back to greater governance, ESG, cleaning up companies, clean businesses, the GCs of each of these companies play a crucial role. They have a fiduciary obligation to all the stakeholders of the company because they're employed by the company. And one needs to understand why you invoke privilege, right? So that a person can go to their counsel, be open, get advice based on a complete picture of the facts and circumstances. And in most companies or funds, your GC is the first point of approach, right? If that confidence and if the fact finding there is not covered by privilege, you are to a certain extent compromised or straitjacketed, right? And given the fiduciary obligations, the growing trends, I think it should be. I find that the U.S. law for privilege is far more developed, where I think there was a Court of Appeals judgment at somewhere which talked about an investigation, whether it's in-house, whether it's mandated by external forces or it's been taken up by the company, so long as the pith and substance of that is to understand legal issues, should be covered by privilege. And because there are strategic elements in it or there are operational business elements, does not necessarily negate the privilege. So I think we should be heading towards that direction, particularly because, as Janie said, you're looking at a lot of cross-border investigations, right? So if a U.S. counsel were to come in and start investigating in India, and there's a difference in views of what is taken as privilege and what is not, it gets very murky and very difficult.
I completely agree on that, that on a cross-border investigation, actually, what is the threshold or what is privilege for you actually? Whether what applies in India or what would apply to US or in UK. Having done a few cross-border investigations, I can say that I think it's a tussle within the external councils as well. How do I go about privilege? I mean, the normal practice is obviously you're entering into tripartite agreements in place, but then where is the data stored? Where is the data being held? Where are you interviewing? Are you giving a written report? Are you doing a PowerPoint presentation? Who are you making that presentation to? Is it the corporate? Is it the fund? Where has the engagement actually taken place? Which actually takes me to my next question to Jenny actually. Jenny, when you're doing, maybe for example, if it's an India-related investigation and you are the foreign counsel on board, would you put a lot of reliance on how issues are done locally? Because differing cultures, differing jurisdictions and regulators' approach also make a huge difference. So what would be the strategy when you are partnering in with a local council itself?
Thank you, Payal. Absolutely. Every single investigation I've been involved in India, it was critical to involve local counsel and to be guided by local counsel because, someone flying from overseas has no understanding about the local culture, and how things are done. We need to be respectful of how businesses are done here. And the first point that we always think of, first and foremost, you don't want to disrupt the business. You want to put minimal disruption to the business. And in order to do that, you can't fly someone over to tell people how things are done. We won't. That's just not how the world should operate. So we absolutely rely on local expertise and work very closely and are very much guided by the local council as to what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. What we would then be able to provide input on is how the overseas legislation may impact the matter, and then we work together collaboratively to come up with a joint strategy that fits a particular organization. As Payal and I both said, no one size fits all. Different sectors have different approaches. Even different cities within this country, we've noticed, has, our approach will need to be adjusted. So absolutely, local council, involvement of local council is critical.
Thank you, Jenny. I think I'll move on to the next topic from privilege is, obviously you have done an investigation or during the course of the investigation, there are various stakeholders in place. It's not just maybe my engagement is with the general counsel. I'm not just reporting to the general counsel. There's a board in place in the organization. We have internal auditors. We have the statutory auditors. And trust me, with the new set of regulations, with NFRA tightening the noose, with CARO in place and higher, I would say, responsibilities being placed on auditors, there is no end to the requests or questions being placed by them. And they want to be informed at every stage. Which brings me to the question to Mr. Jalwandwala. being a general counsel of a listed entity, which has several other portfolios, listed and non-listed, each entity may have their own set of auditors itself in place. What role are they playing? Are they really looking into every issue? Are they reporting? How are you engaging in the dialogue itself with the auditors when it comes to an investigation?
Yeah, it's a good question from the governance point of view. You all might be knowing the NAFRA in, I think last year, July or so, 2023, have issued one circular which has put on various responsibilities on the auditor. That is a statutory auditor of the company and chartered accountants also. So as the listed entity and having so many subsidiaries across, not only in India, but abroad also, it has become very important that we follow a governance with zero defect. How to do it? Whenever there is such event occurs, like corruption, bribery, then what we can do? The report is prepared completely. Then it is first put to the audit committee, which is in our case, let me tell all of you that we have gone overboard to the Companies Act and SEBI LODR. And in today's situation, we have kept all the independent directors on the audit committee. Not a single non-independent director is on the audit committee. So they can have their independent view, not only on this subject, but across, and they can discuss freely also. So as a company secretary and as a general counsel, we'll put the report to the first audit committee. The audit committee will discuss, and during the audit committee meeting, the statutory auditors are also sitting there. They are also making their presentation about how they have done the audit for quarter, annually or so. So they have been also presented about what has happened as far as the complaint is concerned. And the auditor role in this case is little bit less, because depending upon the complaint, we do our in-house check and control, in-house investigation, or where need arises, we go to the external counsel. So auditor role is that he will go through this complaint, he will find out again from the accounts that is there any other such situations or events happen, and it is the auditor role to submit its report to NAFRA. And that has been decided, that has been put in the circular that they have to give this report prior to signing of the auditor's report. So that is required by the auditor. So this is the role, and board of directors, finally it goes to the board of directors. The board of directors, comprise of both the non-independent and independent. It has been discussed at the board, and finally take a view or give this report that what has been the action taken, and they will suggest, if need be, some additional actions also. And having the independent boards with profound and quite knowledgeable professionals, IAS, IRS, chartered accountants, they also understand how to take it forward, and we get a good guidance from the board of directors. But fortunately, I must say, as far as our listed entities having 15 plus businesses across and about 10 plus listed companies, we have very less to that extent such anti-corruption and anti-bribery issues or cases, very less. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And just to add a slight different dimension with respect to the internal auditor aspect. See, I think, internal auditors, when they go across, do audits across the organizations, they get to a lot of flavor, whether it's procurement related aspects or CSR related aspects or employee expenses and all. They get a sense of what's happening and, some kind of a trends and directional. And some of those inputs, back to the general counsel or back to the compliance officer would be very useful to, strengthen the program. I think this is more from a, not from reporting standpoint, but from a general communication
Internally
standpoint.
within itself. Yeah.
I think that would be very useful, is what I just want to mention. Yeah.
And I think the reason I also asked this question is because of the change in the circular. What has happened is earlier only if they, during the course of their reporting or investigation, found something, they had the requirement to report. But now it's not just them themselves finding it. Anything that comes up in the course of the year and they are informed about a whistleblower complaint, and if it's above a particular threshold itself, there is a requirement to go and report it. So I think it's greater responsibility on them, which, if balanced properly and worked along with all the stakeholders, is actually in the interest of the organization itself. I'm aware we are just left with 10 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up with one final issue, which is we are done with our investigation. We have found the results. We have got a report. The role of the external counsel has actually ended. But then, as an external counsel, often what we are told is you have to give a report and give your recommendations. The recommendations are also have to be discussed in line, because I think, as rightly put, we don't want to disrupt the businesses. It can't be something which takes a huge toll on the organization itself and could affect a lot of business relationships. So the recommendations need to be very carefully put through. You have to balance, see the pros, cons, and actually, I think one of the very interesting things in a recent investigation, what we did is we put in several counts for each misconduct. Did a pointer, okay, this is the misconduct, 2 points. See how many points it's adding up to and put a threshold. If it's this many points, then in that case, termination. If it is only maybe 5 points, I would give a warning. So it was a very good way of trying to categorize the misconduct itself and accordingly decide the action I am going to take about it. So in that context, I think first let me start with Jenny itself. As an external counsel, how do you go about with the recommendations itself, or what next steps need to be put in the organization?
Okay, I guess very briefly, 2 points. As external counsel, one thing we also have to be very careful of is our recommendations can't come back and bite us, because I have to say from personal experience, one time we made, because we knew that the client wanted to hear a certain message, so we had to have our own independent views, and we expressed it and we justified our views, but 5 years later, turns out the US government took the whole issue to surface again, and we had to defend our report. So, so that was not very, very pleasant. But I think overall, as you say, Payal, has to be practical. It has to be something that people can actually follow. You really have to understand. There's no point in writing a very fancy or making a very fancy recommendation when practically it's going to cost the business too much to comply with, and no one's actually going to understand it and no one can follow it. So I think I'm conscious of time. I think the main thing is know the business, understand what the needs are, and understand how whatever you recommend can actually be implemented in a practical way.
I agree. How do we, there is a limit to the recommendation itself. But Anushri, that brings me to the question, at a fund, maybe you are reporting to the investors as well. How would you want to balance those recommendations? Would you want it to be, in what format you would want it? Is there a particular way? A lot of times there are things we can achieve through a dialogue itself. So is there a particular way you have in mind when you deal with investigations?
Any recommendations that we look at, there's no one size fits all. First of all, you have to look at the gravity of the situation. Is it a fraud? Is it, some other issue? How do you want to deal with it? Impact on the business? And you have to balance that with your fiduciary obligation to your investors, because it's their money, it's their reputation, the huge reputational implications of a whistleblower complaint. And if it's not done in a proper manner, if it's not done in an ethical manner, the chances of the whistleblower feeling like they've not been heard, or feeling like things are being brushed under the carpet, especially when there's actually a critical issue, may then go to investigative authorities, which is a much bigger problem that you face. So it's how should I say, it's evolving, because businesses are different, right? A bank and an NBFC is different from an infrastructure company, is different from a pharmaceutical, is different from a startup. The business issues are different, reputational risks are different, who are critical to a particular business is different, where the leakages happen, that's different. So, it's a very case-to-case basis. I think we are still grappling with the issues. The only thing that I would recommend, at least from a general counsel standpoint, is that you are conscious of your fiduciary obligations and the larger implications of not doing something.
True. Shujat, I think there's no straight-jacket formula. I guess all of us would agree at some point that it can't be one straight answer that it will fit everybody. But is there something we would do specifically from a mitigating the risk in future? Is there something
Sure.
you would have in mind?
Yeah, I think, after the whole investigation is done, there are recommendations as per the, the parameters and all. I think there are key lessons learned, of this whole aspect. It may need that, you have to go and amend some policy or amend some process, or how do we mitigate and, put on those corrective actions. That is number one. Number two, most of the times in the organization, people will not know what happened. And of course, there is a debate that you will not talk about exact case and all. So there are two approaches which we can do. One, a general communication in a redacted manner, what exactly happened, what step company has taken, and what are the lessons learned, and what action has been. That gives a very strong message back to the organization. And taking some of these elements and bringing as a case studies and putting in the learning programs also will be of a greater help to mitigate the same thing again. I think these are two
I think
thoughts.
that's a fantastic idea. I'm going to end today's session. We're just left with 4 minutes with some last words from Mr. Jalundwala, where I want to understand. Obviously, they have said that you can bring it as case studies, or there is no answer, it's an evolving situation. But in a corporate of that size, it could be the smallest of the complaint which could lead to a huge issue. It may not be with the main parent entity, it could be with any random portfolio where a situation is happening. It could have cross border implications where you're dealing with regulators across the globe. You are dealing with the investigation, it is ongoing, you are facing various regulators. But internally, while it's going on, are we taking any active steps so that we don't face it in future, or take corrective action while the investigation is ongoing? Is there any path or guidance which general counsels need to keep in mind while they are addressing such big investigations?
So, when there is a big investigation, either we get the investigation completed and we get the report of the investigation. Then, as a general counsel, firstly, I have to see that what is the gravity, how far it is impacting to the organization. From the material impact is there, financial impact is there, reputation loss is there. All this we have to see. And based on that, first of all, it is required how to checks and control and take the corrective steps. The corrective steps can be taken by putting certain points on the website of the company. I think giving more knowledge or awareness to the employees through keeping some lectures of the external counsels and give them the idea, okay, this is happening and how we should avoid all such situations. Similarly, what we can say as a disclosure part within the organization also, we can say that such things are happening and we should, I think, reduce this, or we should, how to zero down it. We have recently, what we have done as an HR practice, everyone has to undergo a particular course as far as ABC laws are concerned. And his or her PMS or annual whatever performance rating also will depend upon whether she has or he has undergone this particular course or not. That is designed internally only. So all this gives awareness. Secondly, also we see how far we have to disclose the actual event. The disclosure, you know, in SEBI LODR, now they have given certain parameters what is needed to be disclosed. But sometimes, for the governance point of view, if we find we need to disclose, we try to disclose, and not only to the investors at large, but also to some of the investors who are investing a huge amount in the company, to have a small conference with them and saying such things happen. But I have told in last my question, what you have asked, that fortunately we have not such much event as of now, even though we have a conglomerate and having more than 10 listed companies. Thank you.
I think one common thought which ends up from this is everyone is a lot more aware. Frankly, when I started in this profession 15 years back, I don't think we had a separate white-collar practice in India in any of the law firms or saw internal investigations being done. But in the last 5 to 7 years, maybe bribery, corruption has increased in the country. But at the same time, awareness has also increased. We are seeing the corporates actually actively taking steps towards having policies, implementing those, and taking action also, not just doing an investigation on the face of it to show that there is an investigation, but following through with it. And I think the idea that there are going to be cross-border implications, having counsels from all jurisdictions, and I think the general counsel is taking an active role in it and approaching it, okay, we are faced with a situation, but we need to deal with it and ensure it doesn't happen going forward. Itself shows that it's a step in the right direction. And on that note, I'm going to end. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to all my panelists for being here and agreeing to be here in Delhi. Thank you so much for being here. Lovely.
South Asia Committee of the International Law Section presents the Global Lawyers Summit in association with CNBC TV 18.